A bit of a prologue. I've been formulating my thoughts on free will for a while now. I think at least as late as May of 2017. I've definitely put a lot of thought into my argument, and have had a video ready to upload since October. Now, since I finished it, I found I've done even more thinking. Not so much into which side of argument I stand on. Really, I do agree with everything I've said in this video, but more of a matter of focus, where I found particular interests in what we can't control, the layering over our true intentions. I found this to be a more interesting and useful topic than simply interpreting free will as real or not. I was tempted to scrap this one to build a new vid around this topic, but I think I'll save these particular thoughts for part 2. Enjoy the video. The free will argument could get tiring. Lots of back and forths and arguments you've heard before. Now, something I noticed with both sides of the argument is that they are often based on points that are relatively redundant and easily agreed upon. Stuff that is observable during our day-to-day lives, much like any other facet of politics. And really, it is a matter of framing the argument. Now, I'll just say I'm a yeser, a affirmative believer in free will. I've put a lot of thought into my arguments, so clearly when I will bring up the array of points, I will have my side. And all I can really promise is to represent the other side as fairly as possible. So first there's the idea of 1001 factors, where when you account for all the factors within your existence, specifically ones that you can't control which affected you from your early life, like biology or parents, you'd find that a lot of your life is predetermined. Now first, basically everyone is fully aware of these facts. Really, the disagreement comes into how does this conclude into there is no free will. Our whole lives are made up of factors, and when breaking it down, there isn't anything to really go against it. Even something like the soul. It would be basically another factor if it existed. You never chose your soul, which makes arguing against it futile when understanding the way of the factors. Ultimately, when understanding the whole argument, it basically works like a flatliner. Much like debating agnosticism, you can't be 100% certain of what affects you. The point is understanding a metric. Same logic when understanding the factors, as there are certain processes that are worth noting when talking about them, such as the biological processes of growing up throughout our lives, from being malleable and susceptible to influence while young, compared to being more confident and self-assured when you get older. Everyone is meant to process and how to deal with a life full of factors. The point is, every decision comes from an elaborate calibration of all the factors, concluding in a simple choice. Another sort of argument is one of vagueness, specifically within the mind, such as how our justification for doing the things we do isn't the same as the actual reason why. There are studies that show that through the process of choosing, there ends up being a delay to when we choose to do something and when it is physically expressed. Really, the greatest conclusion I find with all these nuances is how complex it is. This probably isn't that surprising, as there is indeed a lot beyond the external face. And even if everything you do is thought out well in advance, I don't think it would really deny free will, since it is still components of yourself that is making these choices. It is a matter of control and self-understanding to make them work better in your favor. Now, when breaking down a lot of Noah arguments, they generally derive from these facts, how they show a lack of control and determinism. Further examining these points, we have the likes of Sam Harris, a prominent knower, is among many who present many hypotheticals and situations. Here's one that he often points out.
Like the names of famous people. So you didn't know I was going to ask you to think of a famous person.
Right.
I ask you. Now all of a sudden you've got the various names percolating, one of which was not Sylvester Stallone, but could have been, right?
Yeah.
Now, so if you had thought of Sylvester Stallone, that wouldn't have astonished you. It's like it just would have been, okay, Sylvester Stallone, Marlon Brando, you would have just been thinking, right? It would just have been another name. But then I would have said, well, why didn't you think of Chris Rock? He said, I don't know why I didn't think of Chris Rock. He's just as familiar to you, and yet he didn't come forward. Well, it's exactly like that with everything, and it doesn't get, you don't get any freer the more you deliberate Like if I said, listen, don't rush this process. I want you to take an hour.
Right.
You know, you'd be the same process, and let's say you narrow it down to 2 people, and you're going back and forth between Marlon Brando and Chris Rock, and then you finally stick with Brando. Now, whatever story you have to tell yourself that justifies that, you didn't pick that either, right?
You didn't pick that story.
You didn't pick the story.
Yeah.
And I mean, in many cases, those stories aren't even true, right? So like there's a vast psychological literature on just how clueless people are about why they do what they do in certain circumstances. I mean, you can manipulate this in the lab endlessly. But even if the story is true, right? Even if you say, well, I picked Marlon Brando because I saw that documentary on him last week and it was great and you should see it, and so I was kind of primed to think about Marlon Brando. Let's say that's just true, right? Still, you didn't pick its influence on you.
Right.
You didn't. Like, why were you influenced to that degree and not a lesser degree? Or why weren't you influenced oppositely? Why didn't the fact that you had seen a documentary on him make you think, well, I can't pick Brando because, you know, I've just been thinking about him all week long. I'm going to go with Chris Rock, right? All of this is mysterious. It never becomes unmysterious.
Yeah.
No matter how full an account you can give of it.
Here in this display is essentially to see what is the first that comes to mind of a certain subject. In this case, celebrities, though in others he used other groups like countries. Now, something he draws attention to is why the person chooses, the thought process, and if it could be trusted, why these specific people come to mind. Now, as I stated before, the mind is complicated, having a multitude of factors, and why you feel the way you do is obviously a bit hard to discern. Now, with that said, while it is hard to track back why you specifically picked Chris Pratt, you could probably at least notice which factors are more likely than others, better understand your thought patterns, and with that, gain better control. The point that I ultimately keep making is that there is a metric which determines someone's ability to decide, or intelligence, which ultimately ties into my yes-or argument. Not everyone has the same capabilities. There's a difference between intelligence between a dog, a baby, and an adult human. And through the differences in randomizing, intelligence, or dependency on others, comes the difference in choice and free will. Now, what I'm saying is redundant, and a knower like Sam Harris would fully agree with what I just said. The difference comes again in the interpretation of free will. The general concept of free will is the ability to act without being constrained by some external force. And really, whatever fate or force is acting is still up to the interpretation of the individual. Predetermined factors could be enough for a knower, or the ability to freely choose between vanilla and chocolate's enough for a yeser. When breaking it down even further, it is clear that a lot of a person's personal beliefs and agendas are injected into which side of a free will argument gets swayed. A yeser would probably want to focus more on one's ability to overcome the omnipresent factors, while a knower might be more interested in how one is susceptible to them. A knower could be doubtful of a human's capabilities, or maybe they just associate free will too much with religion, like the concept of a soul.
And as disturbing as I might find such a person's behavior, I have to admit that if I could trade places with him, atom for atom, I would be him. I mean, there's no extra part of me that could decide to see the world differently or could decide to resist the impulse to victimize other people. And even if you believe that each of us harbors an immortal soul.
Plenty of yesers also view free will as a euphoric feeling, a sort of superpower which makes them special.
Is that Satan?
But what are you talking
Satan.
about?
That's Satan.
Just you're
well,
saying
Satan
something
becomes
insane.
something that the stupid preacher tells you about, who's totally controlled, or something you read about on in the news or TV.
Right.
But this is an interdimensional force that wants to influence us to build something that absorbs us and kills us, rather than the divine free will we're given to build something much better that empowers the species.
It's not the machine that resists you. It's me, my spirit.
So the species is now making a decision
Where are you getting
about its
this
entire
from?
future.
Where are you getting this from?
That's what it is.
For me, I fully admit that free will has a dopaminic effect, where I could feel like I have control and be the arbiter of my life. With that said, I certainly tried to understand more of both arguments, and to be frank, found a lot of knowers to have the much stronger ones. However, now, I feel that I am well solidified in my position. Free will is real and it's in abundance. Completely rational to believe.
Including fear.
And to add, by the way, and also, if you ask me, I think we have free will. And how do I know that? Because we have no choice but to have free will.
Override engaged? No! Yes! Bypassing override! I am
You saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart.